Hello and welcome to Azure Active Directory versus traditional AD. In this lesson, we're going to compare Azure Active Directory with the traditional on-prem version of Active Directory that we're all so familiar with. Azure Active Directory is essentially Microsoft's next iteration of identity and access management for the cloud. It's an identity as a service solution that organizations can use for all applications, whether they're in the cloud or on-prem. While most administrators are familiar with the traditional Active Directory domain services offering, there are some key differences between the on-prem version and Azure Active Directory. When it comes to provisioning users, an organization that's running the traditional Active Directory on-prem will typically create its AD users manually or through automated provisioning systems that are hosted in-house. To provision users in Azure Active Directory, organizations with an existing on-prem Active Directory implementation can use Azure AD Connect to synchronize those on-prem user identities into Azure AD. Such organizations can also create users automatically in Azure AD through the use of cloud HR systems and through SIM-enabled software as a service applications. To create external users in a traditional on-prem Active Directory, an organization will typically create those users manually in a dedicated external Active Directory forest. This obviously results in quite a bit of administration overhead just to manage those external users. Azure Active Directory addresses this issue with its Azure AD B2B offering, which manages the links to external user identities. There's no need for additional domains or forests or anything like that. To grant access to resources and applications in a traditional on-prem Active Directory, administrators will create groups which are granted permissions to those resources and applications. Users are then added to those groups to grant them the access that they need. Now, groups are also available in Azure Active Directory. Like the on-prem version of AD, Azure AD groups can also be used to grant access to resources. Administrators in Azure AD can add users to groups manually, or they can use queries to dynamically include users in a particular group. The entitlement management feature of Azure Active Directory can be used to provide users with access to collections of applications and resources through workflows. Access can also be granted with time-based criteria as well. Now, when it comes to admin management, organizations using an on-prem Active Directory will often leverage domains, OUs, and groups to delegate those admin privileges for those who need to manage Active Directory and the resources it controls access to. In Azure Active Directory, built-in roles, the Role-Based Access Control System, or RBAC, and even the ability to create custom roles allow you to delegate privileged access to not only the identity system itself, but to also applications and resources controlled by it. The Privileged Identity Management offering, or PIM, allows you to provide what's called just-in-time access, workflow-based access, and time-restricted access to privileged roles. In a traditional on-prem Active Directory, credentials are based on passwords, certificates, and smart cards. Passwords for those credentials are managed with password policies that are used to define password lengths, password expiration, and complexity. Azure Active Directory, on the other hand, uses intelligent password protection for both cloud and on-prem credentials. This intelligent protection includes things like smart lockouts and the ability to block common and even custom password combinations. The multi-factor authentication feature of Azure AD significantly enhances security, while the self-service password reset offering reduces support costs by allowing end users to reset their own passwords. When it comes to application support, there are also several differences between the traditional on-prem Active Directory offering and Azure Active Directory. For example, traditional Active Directory doesn't support software as a service applications natively. This means that to use traditional AD with these kinds of apps, you would need to deploy a federation solution such as ADFS, which reduces more administrative overhead and additional hardware costs. Azure Active Directory allows software as a service applications to be integrated, provided they support OAuth 2, SAML, or WS authentication. Services that run on-prem will often use what are called Active Directory service accounts to run. This opens up a security hole since anyone with those credentials can get access that they don't need. Azure Active Directory instead leverages managed identities. These managed identities are managed by Azure AD and they're tied to the resource provider. They cannot be used to gain backdoor access like a traditional on-prem service account can. As far as mobile devices go, traditional Active Directory does not natively support them without the use of third-party solutions. Azure Active Directory, on the other hand, provides integration with Microsoft Intune, which is Microsoft's mobile device management solution, or MDM. Microsoft Intune, in turn, provides device information to Azure AD so that that information can be evaluated during authentication. While traditional AD allows you to join Windows desktops to the domain and to manage them with group policy, Azure Active Directory also allows Windows devices to be joined as well. However, instead of using group policy to manage Azure AD joined Windows machines, you would use Microsoft Intune. Windows servers can also be joined to a traditional Active Directory so that they can be managed via group policy and other solutions. Now, this differs a bit for Azure Active Directory because while Windows virtual machines in Azure can be managed with Azure AD domain services, on-prem Windows servers cannot be joined to an Azure Active Directory. We'll cover Azure AD domain services in a little more detail later on. And lastly, let's talk about Linux workloads. While traditional Active Directory does not support Linux workloads natively without the use of third-party solutions, Linux and Unix virtual machines in Azure can leverage managed identities to access resources. So as you can see, there are quite a few differences and even some similarities between the traditional on-prem Active Directory offering and Azure Active Directory.